Scott and so forth, you guys, have you ever tried to anchor it?
We haven't because it keeps slipping and we have to repair it.
What slips?
The chain slips and you can get it down, but you can't get it back up.
This is in the gypsy and the
Yeah,
capstan?
yeah,
Okay.
so.
That's a problem.
Scott did it and took him the time to get it up and nobody did it. So that's one of our things that we're gonna do immediately in a matter of weeks to work on that.
Get one of those fixed. And is that 100% chain, or is there a chain and nylon?
It's not 100% chain. I think it's half and half or
I
whatever.
forget it is half and half. Okay. And you don't, Antoine, you don't own a boat, and the boats that you are likely to use in the foreseeable future will be.
So I was on most of my sail charter trips were on like 39 to 42 feet
Okay.
sailboats.
So there's a chance in your life, yes, you might be doing that again on
Yeah.
good sized boats where you're anchoring overnight as
Yeah.
well. I figure all of us are liable to go somewhere and drop a hook off a beach for lunch and so forth, but.
I was gonna say I was typically dropping it in sand bottom,
Okay.
beach water.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know before we get going here with what sort of experience you guys are gonna have. All right. So anchoring is our topic for the next 2 hours. So, upon completion, we hope you'll figure out how to get the anchor down. Big part that we're gonna go over here is choosing appropriate locations. Also the basics of selecting the anchor, chain, and rode, picking up moorings, and if you decide to raft to other boats, which is fun, but you have to know how to do that and do it correctly. And almost right away, we're gonna go right into the last one, which is how to tie two of the most important knots when you're anchoring, if you don't have your anchor rode made up ahead of time. So let's talk about two important definitions about anchoring safely. And the two terms are rode and scope. Now the rode simply means, starting with the anchor, whether it's all chain or all line, or in most of us it's a combination of anchor and line, going from the anchor up over the bow roller and to a cleat. So that rope, that combination is called your anchor rode. Okay? Now, scope is a ratio. Ratio, what it means is that typically we like to have that length to be somewhere between 7 to 10 times the vertical distance of what? The vertical distance from the bottom to the surface of the water, and this is what everybody forgets, plus that 2 or 3 feet up to the roller over the bow of the boat. That is the piece everybody forgets.
I can say that again too.
And has to be added together. So it's not merely the depth of the water, it is how, with your rode, and let's presume for both of you it's a nylon line, doesn't matter whether it's nylon or it's chain, but it usually goes over a roller on the front of your boat.
Yes.
So it's from that point, that roller, let's presume everybody's got the roller on the front, from the roller to the bottom in the mud in the sea. So that figure, when you're anchored, you want this rode to be somewhere between 7 to 10 times the length, and we'll talk about why 7, why 10 in a minute. And I'm going to pause just for a minute. I'm going to go through first a lot of this by the book, what we would like to have. And then I'm going to also throw in some cautions about this is all nice in a course like this, but reality sometimes when you get into some harbors is that you end up not being able to have all that much line out. But we'll go there in a minute. Okay, if push came to shove and you did not have a complete professionally done rode made up with anchors and chain and shackles and so forth, and all you had was a line capable of being anchoring your boat, and you wanted to tie it directly to the anchor, you could do so. It would best be thought of as temporary, but you could do so. And there's something called an anchor bend. Bend meaning a knot, where you tie the line onto something else. So it's a good one to know. You may or may not ever use it. So, by rights, so let's presume that, we don't have an anchor to hand you, but let's presume that that's attached to the end of your anchor. And you want to do what we see up here, but let's do it in live action on the next slide and show you how to put that together. Now, let's see if I can get this to, wait a minute. Give me a moment here, let me get my, let's see. So grab your, let's see if I can get it back up here. Oh, come on, don't disappear on me. It was easier at home when I had my mouse. Let's see if I can get this to back up here. Okay. Do what you see on the screen, which is just 2 complete turns around the curve of your shackle. 2 complete turns through the shackle. Okay? And the next step, come here, where are you? I know you're there somewhere. There you are. Now across in front and through under the 2 loops. And at this point you can actually pull it tight. Okay? On the screen they're going to leave it loose so you can see everything. Now that on its own is an anchor bend. Now, I'm going to do this for both of you. You give me the other end of your line, because this is what's going to the, this is going to the anchor, okay? Hang on tight.
Yeah.
If you've done it right, let me see if you've done it right. Wait a minute. I think you did. Yes, you did. You did fine. Okay. So this comes right across. So you've got the 2.
Yeah.
Yours should look like that. Okay. Now you hang on, because you're the anchor and I'm the boat, and I'm pulling on this, and what's happening is it's tightening on itself.
Right.
Okay? So that by itself will work, and yours the same way. You hang on and I'm the boat and I'm going to put a tug on it and it tightens on itself. So a very simple knot to remember if you're in the emergency and you're saying, I don't have my chain or what have you, and I just have an anchor with a shackle and so forth. Then they recommend, for safety, adding 2 half hitches. The simplest knot of all is a half hitch, and you simply do 2 of them right after it, and it's just so that the knot does not come undone. Add another half hitch to that. Just do, and I'll show you up here on the screen.
Hold on, just that quick. What are you doing?
It's just 2 safety knots. That's, oh, come on, don't go away. All right, watch the screen.
Oh.
You just do 2, they just, to make sure you lock the line down and it doesn't come undone. Wrong end. No, the short end.
Oh, this?
The short end. The short end, that's what you're gonna make your knots with.
Okay.
No, you're using the long end.
Oh,
This is
you didn't know.
Well, you got a long end coming off the shackle and a short end coming off it. There you go.
Oh,
2 half hitches.
Oh,
like that?
okay.
Yep. And those are just for safety. It's just, you know, this is,
had enough you.
yeah, right.
you didn't leave enough, but the point of the 2 half hitches is this is underwater. You
Right.
can't see it anymore. You want to stay put for the night. You definitely do not want anything to happen that might loosen that knot in any way, shape, or form. So if you back up the anchor bend with 2 half hitches, the likelihood of this coming undone is almost 0. Now you folks, by the way, keep in mind, you should have received the ebook version of this at your computer at home, and you
They'll get a copy of this PowerPoint too.
That's what I mean, haven't they got it?
They have the,
The-
they have the student
they
version.
just have the student book.
Yeah,
They
they'll
don't
get
have
the
this.
animation from this, but,
Okay.
you know, but
Oh,
getting a
okay.
copy of this too.
All right, that's right too. You've got something slightly different at home. Okay, so that is your anchor bend. Now, I've never used an anchor bend in 20 years of sailing because I've always had an anchor all made up with all shackles and so forth. But it's nice to know that if in emergency you needed such a thing, how to do it. So it's a nice one to practice, and frankly hope you never need it. And I've lost, there we go, there it's going quickly. And then finally you tighten it up.
Right.
They didn't tighten it up very much there, but that's all right. They're just trying to show you the illustration of how this works. Okay? So, knowing an anchor bend is a nice thing to keep in mind. Now, the other piece is a stopper knot. Why would you want a stopper knot? Most of us sailors use them around pulleys and so forth, that we don't want lines to slide out. But it's also a nice way. One of the most critical things in any anchor is that before you put the anchor over the side and into the water, you want to make sure that the bitter end, the other end, isn't going to go sliding over the side of the boat and into the water. You will be part of a very large club of boaters if it happens to you. It's embarrassing and you may lose all your gear. So you don't want to lose that. So it is perhaps not the greatest idea to take that anchor line and tie it here, because that's where you might be wanting to tie off the anchor once it's done. So now you've already got a knot on this, and do you want to put another one on it? Not likely. However, you could take the end of your anchor line and simply, most, not all, most cleats have the hole. And so you could take the end of the anchor line and put a knot in the end of it. Now, a simple half hitch that you just did, oftentimes, first of all, isn't big enough. It could get pulled through. But the other thing is, if it does go under strain, a simple half hitch is not an easy knot to undo. It's the knot we all put in the end of our hoodies strings. It's the knot we always put in the end of our shoelaces if the little plastic aglet came off. Well, the trouble is, if you pull on that and pull on that and pull on that, if you ever for any reason had to undo one of those knots from the end, you can't get them undone. It binds on itself. It's like it's welded to each other. So you can't break, what we call break the knot. And so even if it prevented it from being lost, that's good news. It didn't go overboard and get lost. You may find that you can't get it undone. So to make the knot a little bigger, you do a figure-8 knot, which is your half hitch, you go around one more time. Now I'm going from top, for the half hitch, I'm going through. If I instead go around one more time and come up from the bottom, all of a sudden I've got, here you go, there's your figure-8.
Okay.
Go around one more time, there you go, now in. Now pull it tight, and see the figure-8 you made? Now there's two things. It's a little bigger. And so if you're using it this way with a cleat to cleat off the bitter end of the bitter end is the end of the line that isn't being used, has no pressure on it. If you're using it to tie it off, it's a little bigger, less likely to slip through. The other part of a figure-8 knot is that if you pull and pull and pull and pull and pull, and you must know this from having sailed, you can break the knot. And that is, you simply push on it, and you can get it loosened up, which is one of the secrets that we went through the knots was. You remember the 3 things we want a knot to do from our Marlin Spike in the class? What were the 3 things? What are the 3 things you want a knot to do?
Steady.
That's number 1. You want it to do its job.
You want it to
Number
get
2,
out.
easy to tie.
Yeah.
And number 3, easy to untie. And this fits all 3. It does the job. It's easy to tie, and yes, it's easy to untie. It doesn't get stuck, and you don't have to get out the pliers to get it apart. So those are the 2 good knots to know. Yes, be sure you've got the bitter end, as they call it, of your anchor line firmly attached to the boat somewhere before you get the anchor over. So there's an animation of it. Instead of going right through, around one more time, and you make the figure-8. Okay, so let's go through some of the things that we need to know about this. Selecting an anchorage, doing the actual anchoring. We'll talk a little bit about selecting the equipment, a few tips and tricks, and then finally picking up a mooring, and then also rafting up with other boats. Selecting anchorages. Whether you're going for a lunch or you're going into some place and you want to stay overnight, much of the same considerations take place. One of the things I tell everybody about anchoring is that I have observed, I anchor a lot, I cruise a lot on my boat, I use it as my cottage, and I've cruised some distances and anchor a lot. Anchoring's fun, it's free, and it gets you into places where you can't get sometimes, or there'd be no place for you to go. And you can get into some really beautiful harbors and little places, then, as we call them, little gunk holes, where they're the places everybody remembers. There's no McDonald's, there's no Stop and Shop, but boy, they're pretty little harbors. And what a nice place to stop for lunch, what a nice place to spend the night. Wake up and it's quiet.
Can you anchor
undeveloped.
by yourself like that?
No.
No, you need somebody.
I have done it once.
Yeah.
It was under ideal conditions where there was almost no wind. Thankfully, the next morning, the biggest danger I've had was the next morning trying to be on the bow of the boat and get the anchor up and out of the water and back on my boat without me drifting into the boat near me. So
If you have a windlass, it can be done.
Right.
Yes, but I don't have a windlass, so I had to be on the bow hauling all this stuff, and the minute the anchor came off the bottom, the boat starts to drift. So it was as calm as that scene there. It's the only reason I could pull it off. And I knew it before I went into the harbor that it was supposed to be very calm and quiet. When I anchored, and very calm and quiet the next morning, and I prayed the weather forecast was right. Or I don't know what I would have done, to be honest. And having done it, I decided I won't try that again. But I got 32 feet. My anchor is 35 pounds. I got a lot of chain and so forth. So it takes a while to get my anchor up, especially without a windlass. Now, but selecting an anchorage. First and foremost, no matter what, you want it to be sheltered from the wind. You would prefer not to be anchoring out in the middle of a lot of waves, whether it be because you're near a channel with a lot of motor traffic. You don't want to be anchoring in the middle of Woods Hole with all the waves and so forth. You would prefer to be out of the wind as much as you can, out of the waves and so forth. Depending upon the weather, where inside that harbor you go will depend upon the coming weather and which way the wind will be blowing and so forth. Where you choose in the harbor also will depend upon the water depth. We all have ideal depths that we'd like to be in. And also the type of bottom, and very often on your charts, if you're using paper charts, and I hope if you're out there you have paper charts or chart books on the boat in addition to your chart plotter or your GPS, but your paper charts will give you little abbreviations about what the bottom should be. For those of us down the Cape, it's pretty set in stone that it's going to be sand and mud and so forth. There aren't typically rocky bottoms and so forth, but in other places like up in Maine, yeah, you have to pay attention to places that you can anchor and places you can't. You want the anchor to hold in whatever you're putting down, and not every place you go. It may look perfect like this, but the bottom could be too hard, too soft, what have you. Maybe it's rocky or what have you. And always, if you're anchoring, check your charts and make sure if you're near islands that there aren't big signs on the shore that say cable area, do not anchor. Pay attention to those big signs on the shore. They're there for a reason. They will mark where a cable goes across with electricity. You don't want to put the anchor down and the lights start flickering at the houses and so forth. So, you have to pay attention to the tide, how much tide there is. Are you anchoring at low tide and more water's coming in? Are you anchoring at high tide and the water's going out? If it goes out, how much water will you have under you? And also swinging room. If the wind changes and you swing, how will you, are you too close to shore the other way? Are you going to be swinging into rocks? Is there enough room to swing 360 degrees and not go bump on the bottom? And also, we have to take into consideration other boats. I will tell you that when I go into anchor, and I've watched a lot of people anchor through the years, most people think that you simply, I see an awful lot of people don't know what they're doing and presume you come in the harbor, you find a spot, this looks good, drop the anchor, and 10 minutes later they got a bear on the hands. When I go to anchor, from the time I pull into the harbor and I say to my crew, okay, let's get ready, let's get the anchor out of the forward hatch and get it out on deck and get things ready, that it's a minimum of 45 minutes from the time I say those words until I've got the anchor down, it's set, and I'm happy with where I've located. It's a long careful process to be sure that I end up in the right spot and I'm good for the night and it's set properly. Don't hurry the job. Figure out exactly where you want to go and why, and we'll talk about some of this. So let's presume you've got the right place to go. Bottom conditions, as I say, here on Cape Cod and so forth, and pretty much in Massachusetts, things are lots of good anchorages. One of the things with paper charts, and I call them paper charts, but I mean the plastic chart books and so forth, is that they often have pre-printed right on them little anchors in the harbor. You'll see them spotted around. And what they mean is that the location should be a good location for anchoring, that the bottom will hold anchors. It isn't full of rocks. It isn't full of crap. It isn't. But if you see things where it says grass or it says rocks or rocky, you don't want to be anchoring in grass. The anchor's going to catch on the grass and the roots, and you're going to be hoping that the grass stays put all night long. Not a good idea. Rocky can jam up the anchor, is not a good thing. You won't get a good hold there. So make sure that the bottom that it's going into is a good one. Lowering the anchor. We're going to talk about weighing the anchor, getting it out of the water. In situations where you might have to set two anchors, I have set two anchors only once in my life, and that was down in the Caribbean on a beach area. What to do if things get messed up underwater? So, best things for anchoring in is if the chart says sand, if the chart says mud, if it says clay, it should be okay. Clay could be very hard, but usually on the bottom it's okay. Not so good, grass. Certainly not gravel. Anchors tend to just pull through gravel. Think about gravel when we're talking about things, you know, the size of the end of my thumb or bigger. The anchor will just pull right through it in most cases. And certainly rocks can be nasty, and if the rocks are big enough, your anchor can get stuck on them, and then it may hold you, but you may not get it back up again. So stay away from those three kinds of bottoms. That's why it's important to pay attention to your chart. Coral, we don't have to worry about up here. This is important. Work with your crew. If you've got two of you on there, which is the best thing, is the person on the bow should be looking ahead and back to you and telling you what to do because you've instructed them on what's going to happen and where you want to be and how you want to go. And if they've got the good instruction from you ahead of time, then they can help you steer, whether it be because you're putting the anchor down, or more likely this would be because you're taking the anchor up and the person on the bow can see the anchor road going off maybe a little left, a little right. Gee, it's still back, we're getting blown back too hard, you got to give it a little more speed, whatever it is. They can tell you what's going on with the anchor road, and you're back at the controls, at the wheel, you can't see the anchor road, so they can tell you what you need to do. And so get your hand signals figured out ahead of time so you both know what the hand signals mean. And if you've trained your crew ahead of time for what you want to have happen, then it will be fine. When I go to anchor, I've instructed my crew ahead of time where I want to anchor, and I will tell them, for example, that I don't need hand signals from them when we're anchoring because I'm in charge of that, of where the boat's going to go and where I want the anchor dropped. Again, with something we'll go through here in a few minutes. And so in most cases, I've told them that we've got the anchor out on deck, it's ready to go, all the line is flaked out on deck and so forth, and we will motor up to a certain spot, and I'm going to tell them, okay, we're going up by that power boat, and on the other side we're going to be up beside this boat over here, and about halfway between them, or I'd say a little ahead and so forth, I'm going to come to a stop, and when I tell you, you're going to put the anchor down and put it over the side. So they're waiting to hear from me. I'm not waiting to hear from them when they're anchoring. It's up to me to get the boat in the right position. It's up to me to tell the person on the bow when I want the anchor to go down. It's up to me to tell the person on the bow how many feet of water are under us. Now, on my boat, for example, I have 35-pound anchor. I'm oversized on everything. I have 30 feet of chain, And so I typically would be putting the anchor down in water that's probably anywhere from 10 to maybe as much as 20 feet deep. That means some of the anchor chain's still on deck when the anchor touches bottom. But as you're going to see when we do a demo here in a minute, it's important that the person on the bow knows how much to expect to put in the water before the anchor hits the bottom. As we're going to see, you don't want, I'll show you in a few minutes, you don't want the crew person on the front to put the anchor down and all the chain down and start feeding line over the front and have it all pile up on the bottom of the ocean floor and make a mess on the bottom. So it's important that I've told the person you're going to put about half the line over and then it's going to hit bottom, and then I give them more instructions. I'll show you how I do that here in a few minutes. And then I let the boat ride back, and I've given them instructions, and what they're waiting for me to say is 6 feet, and they let 6 feet of line out. And as the boat, feel the boat drift back, I'll say 6 feet, and this keeps going 6 feet, 6 feet, and they're waiting to hear instructions from me when we're setting the anchor. I'm not waiting to hear from them. Boats like yours on your GPS, you may have a drift alarm on the GPS. I know I do on my chart plotter. And if you charter a boat Antoine, you may have a drift alarm. We're going to talk about that. It's a safety so that you sleep well at night and know that the boat hasn't dragged across the harbor. All right, we're going to talk about it right now. I didn't know this was the next slide. Now, on many boats, you will have a drift alarm available on your chart plotter. And the idea of a drift alarm is you're going to go in an anchor overnight, and you've set it well, and you think you're fine. But needless to say, if you're new at it, or you're uncertain of the bottom, or for whatever reason it's going to be a windy night and so forth, you would prefer to get some sleep and not fear that are we dragging, I feel motion and all that stuff. And so a drift alarm is nice because you can set it and leave it on, and an alarm will sound if the boat moves somewhere you don't want it to move. The way it works is that you get it all set up, and you have done some calculations from the first screen about how much road you're going to put out. And let's presume you've done your calculations. Now, I've skipped a bunch of steps. We will cover this. You've done your calculations and figured out, I'm going to put out 100 feet of road. And so the anchor's going to go here. I'm going to have 100 feet of road, and let's presume you've done your calculations, so 100 feet goes to the back of the boat, or what have you. And so if the wind shifted in the night, your boat might travel around here in any position. It could. And so that's fine, because your anchor's still on the bottom. You don't care, as long as the boat stays in here. If the boat goes out here, you want to know, because now you know that something's wrong on the bottom and the anchor's dragging. And so if you set the alarm for 100 feet, or a little extra 120 feet, and you set your alarm when you drop the anchor, you'll be fine, because an alarm won't go off until your boat drifts a little further, maybe another boat length beyond the circle, and the alarm will go off and wake you up, and you know you've drifted a little further than you should have, and you can come up on deck and see what's going on, and if need be, reset the anchor. But the alarm won't be that you bumped into the boat beside you or the rocks on shore. Many people forget, and they set their anchor, they put the boat back here where it belongs, they turn off the engine, and oops, forgot the anchor alarm, and they set the anchor alarm. Now the trouble is the anchor alarm is set here, for this location. And if the boat swings out here, well, when you set it here, this is this area that the alarm considers the safety position. And as long as you stay from here to here, the alarm doesn't go off. But if you do swing over here in the middle of the night, well, now you get an alarm, and actually you're just fine. The boat hasn't gone anywhere, but you get a false alarm. So the important thing is to have the drift alarm set up, have the calculations done for how many feet are you going to allow as a safety zone, length of the road, and maybe another boat lengths, whatever the length of your boat is, and you hit that button when you give the instructions, okay, lower the anchor, you punch the alarm and set it for that spot. And then you'll be able to sleep at night instead of worrying about, are we moving?
Joe, what happens if, you know how much rope you have and the various depths of water, what happens if you did calculations like at 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, and have it all written down on an Excel spreadsheet so you know I'm in 20 feet plus the amount
Mhm.
of the water? So it's an easy calculation that you can just refer to immediately instead of counting on your hands.
Well, if you've got your cell phone,
Yeah,
you've got a calculator.
right,
So if you're not good with adding numbers up in your head and multiplying,
right.
get out the cell phone. And so let's talk about that for a moment. Let's pause here and let me grab and let's talk about the things that you would want to do. So let's talk about that ratio. So we've got the sea bottom and we've got the water here. And let's keep it simple. We're coming in at low tide, and it's 10 feet at low tide. And we're down the Cape, and there's a 3-foot tide. So we have to allot for that. And so we know that at high tide, there's 3 more feet of water. So at high tide, it's now gonna be 13 feet at high tide. And then our boat's gonna be sitting on it. And there's 2 feet from the water up to the bow roller. So at low tide, this is gonna be from here to there, 12 feet. But we have to allow for what happens at high tide when the boat's sitting up here. And now we've got 13 plus 2, so we have 15 feet. So when you anchor, this is the number you have to plan for at night or during the course of the day. Are you going to be there during a high tide? You might come in at high tide, and that number will already be calculated at 15. But if you're coming in somewhere in between, figure out, okay, how much water will be in at high tide, because then that's how much you have to work the scope against. The ratios we talked about in the book is that they tell you the ideal is for a normal, calm night. Well, let's start with the easy one. You're just going to be somewhere for lunch. And on lunch means you're off the beach. You're going to stay for 3 or 4 hours. Kids are going to jump on the dinghy and go into the beach, and somebody's sitting at the helm, and the kids going in, and you're going to watch them, and you're going to stay on the boat, and the wind isn't too bad, and so you can get away with as little as 5 to 1. That is enough to hold you under those calm conditions for short term at the beach. Okay? Clearly, if anything goes wrong, it's daylight, you're awake, you're sitting at the helm, you can take care of things if all of a sudden the boat starts to move. Okay?
Just the one. 5 to 1.
5 to 1 is okay there.
No, but what at 5 feet?
So, ratio of 5 to 1, which would mean that if you're coming in at high tide, you want 5 times that
15.
number.
Okay,
So,
7.
75 feet. So you want the anchor road to be out to your anchor at 75 feet at 5 to 1. Now, if you've got an anchor overnight, and conditions going to be normal, it's going to blow 10 miles an hour, it's going to blow 15 miles an hour tonight. Ideally, you'd like to be at, if I can get my pen to work here, they tell you they'd like you to be at 7 to 1 for overnight. So now we want to have more line out and have the anchor out here, and we want 7 times 15. So now we're at 105 feet. At 7 to 1, okay? Now, however, the forecast is thunderstorms coming through tonight. 2 o'clock in the morning. Likely to be thunderstorms, gusts up to 40. Okay. Now we want to be sure that even when there's a lot of strain and a lot of pull, that anchor stays put. So now we're gonna go to 10-1 for windy conditions. You know, it's gonna be 35, maybe more. And you wanna be sure that you're staying put. There's gonna be a lot of strain, it's gonna be trying to pull that anchor out. So now you'd like to be out here at 10-1. And that's gonna be 150 feet. Now, you're only in, at high tide, you're only in 13 feet of water. That ceiling's at 8 feet. It's not much deeper or how much higher than that. The water isn't all that deep at high tide. It's half again what you have here. So your elementary school classroom ceilings are probably 12. Yeah, that isn't very deep water. And yet if it's gonna be real windy that night, you need 150 feet out. Why? Because your anchor only works when you're pulling it as flat as you can across the bottom of the ocean. The flatter it is, the deeper it digs in. How do you get an anchor out? You motor up over it, you pull it straight up. So the straighter up the pole, the more likely to pull out. The lower the pole, if I take a pick, I slam it into your lawn all the way deep. Well, I can go over and pull it straight up and up. I tie a line onto it, walk way across the lawn. Now I try to pull the pick that way. Same idea with an anchor. All the parts of an anchor are designed to dig into the mud, dig into the sand, and to resist going that way. In order to make that happen, you need this angle to be as flat as possible to the surface. In reality, what you would like is the anchor dug in and chain across the bottom, and then finally attached to a rope, and it's the rope that comes up, but the chain keeps, the weight of the chain keeps this on the bottom, and even if it pulls, maybe the chain doesn't come up off the bottom until the wind starts to build. Now at 35 miles an hour, sure, it might start to build and even might want to start pulling the chain up off the bottom, depending upon how heavy your chain is. Okay? I mean, think about if I could attach an anchor chain that you use in your boat, and I could attach one end of it with a bolt real low on the wall over there, and I came back 20 feet and picked up the other end. And if it's a good heavy anchor chain, could I lift it and pull it and lean back and get that whole chain to stay off the rug and not touch the rug? How much pull would it take? A lightweight chain, maybe, a little baby chain. But if it's an anchor chain for your 35 footer, I know I couldn't do it, and I don't think any one of us could. And that's the point, you want that weight keeping it on the bottom, so even as the wind starts to pull, it stays on the bottom. If it blows so hard that even this comes up, well, we want that angle to be as shallow as possible. Here's what this looks like. So if I take, Jim, you may want to turn the camera for me. If I take my boat, this boat, if we do a 1/2 inch to the foot, this boat's roughly a 15, 16 foot boat. To scale, that's 10 feet of water, okay? If you anchor in 10 feet of water, and this is 3 feet off, so 10 feet plus 3, so we're in 13 feet. So at 5-1, I want to put out 65 feet. 10 plus 3 is 13, times 5 is 65. All right, so you'd like to have 65 feet of line out, anchor road out to the anchor for a lunchtime hook, calm conditions. Let me see if I can get my thing untangled here. What does that actually look like when you do it on the bottom of the ocean? Okay, I lost a couple of my tabs. So what does 65 feet look like? It's surprisingly long. Antoine, would you, that's 65 feet, would you take that out, out and stretch it out? Am I standing on it? So that doesn't make it quite easier. Okay. The boat's 15, this 65 feet. That's longer than you thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's at lunchtime in 10 feet of water. Okay? Now, if it's gonna be overnight and the wind's gonna be blowing, we'd like to have out 7 to 1, or just because, no, without the wind blowing, we'd like it to be 7 to 1, 13 feet of water. Now we want it to go to 90 feet. Can you find the 90 and pull it out to 90?
There it is.
That's a lot of, but you notice now the angle. Notice how shallow that is? So when this pulls, that anchor is not likely to pull out. It's fairly low. And the reality is that with the, if you've got a lot of anchor chain, the anchor chain is going to sit in the bottom, and actually it's going to be like this, but I only moved it a very short distance. Watch what happens. I moved the boat back very little, and it's up off the bottom, okay? Now, if it was going to be a very windy night, and I'm going to move the boat back here, and we wanted it to be 10 to 1, now find the 130-foot mark.
That's 120 right there.
Let's say 120 or 130.
You said 130.
Is there one for 130? Yeah, that's it? Okay, that's what I figured. So that's a long way. Now, if you were ever anchoring in 20 feet of water, have you got 230 feet at the end of that line? Go ahead, stand up and take a walk. Stand up and take a walk, and look, if you anchored at high tide and 20 feet and it was gonna blow like crazy and you wanted to stay put, now bring it up to the level of the table. Bring it up to waist height, there we go. That's where your anchor would have to be. Holy moly. Do you have 230 feet of line on your boat? Probably not.
But there would have to be no other boat,
Now,
nothing around.
that presents the problem that we have. In the book, these ratios for scope are fine to do in a book. But the reality is, we're boating here in New England. There's a lot of boats. It's worse down in Florida and other places. And so what can you do? Now, some of their recommendations in here, they tell you that, you know, you should have at least 6 feet of anchor chain. I think anybody who sets up an anchor for their boat, that their chain should be 1/2 the length of the boat. Minimum. My opinion, that would be minimum. So use extra chain. If your boat's 20 feet, make sure you've got 10 feet. On your boat,
60. 70.
no, half the length of the boat.
Oh. So it'd be
So 16, 17 feet. Yeah. Now, because I know that anchorages get crowded, so therefore you're putting more weight on the bottom, less nylon line. So now you've got that extra weight down there laying on the bottom. It's harder to pull it up. If suddenly I made this chain, instead of being 15 feet long, I made the chain 30 feet long, it would be way, 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 way harder to try to pull it up and keep the whole chain off the bottom. So the more chain you have, the better it is for keeping the boat in place, for keeping the pole against the end of that anchor flat and keep it digging in. So extra chain helps. That will reduce the amount of total scope that you need. All of a sudden, those things where we saw, gee, at 10 to 1, I need to be at 130 feet. Holy moly. Yes, that's the problem. You start to swing on a 130-foot circle, you're going to be bumping everybody. Because most people don't know enough to put enough out. And it's just too crowded. Harbors aren't that big. Too many boats in there.
What
You've got to put out
happens-
less.
What happens if you anchor at high tide?
Yep.
Then it's low tide. It doesn't matter.
Okay, so surprisingly enough, so let's show what happens. So if we anchor here, and let's go to the, let's just go to the 5 to 1. All right, so it's just lunchtime, but we want 5 to 1. So I'm going to attach it here, right at the edge, and I'm going to hold it. You stretch that out for me. All right, now you hold it there. Now, let's watch where my boat is, okay?
Yeah.
So we've got that tight. Now the tide goes out. Let's see how far back the boat drifts when I go down to 10 feet.
Not that much.
I didn't go back to here.
Right.
10 feet. I went back. It's surprisingly enough, you go back very, very little, only a couple of feet.
Just
Doing this
line.
or this. It's not really that much of a difference, okay?
All right. So you're
So
better
that
off
you don't have to
doing,
worry about.
do it at the high.
But you do want it at high tide because the difference comes in, put your thumb on that again for me, Antoine. The difference does come in on, okay, that's nice and shallow. That's still shallow enough. But you don't want to find yourself in a position where, now stick your thumb there for me, where suddenly you're going from its angled like that to its angled like this. Now that's, and change in that angle. Once it gets, if you're pulling it and the angle here, the number is amazingly small. If that angle, when it's being pulled, under stormy conditions, full strain conditions, is over 4 degrees. 4. We're talking something over this.
Mm.
You're in danger of driving. You want to keep that as much as you can on the bottom. So therefore, for example, on my boat, because I know I anchor a lot, I don't know what the conditions will be like and so forth, and I want to sleep well, I went to a bigger chain, heavy duty, and I went to 30 feet, not 15. I've got 30 feet of chain on a 20-foot boat.
So
Now-
what you,
I've got 30 feet of chain on a 32-foot boat.
so you calculate, when you are gonna anchor, a spot that you know when you're gonna anchor, you go by the high tide depth.
I presume I'm going to go through a high tide.
And draw,
And I-
calculate it based on that.
And what I usually end up with is, the reality is that if I can get at least a 5-to-1, I'm okay.
Mm,
I prefer a 6-to-1. It's real hard these days to get 7-to-1.
mm,
And 10-to-1 is, I mean, the trouble is because in most cases I'm anchoring in harbors where maybe the harbor happens to be full of moorings. If it's a nice harbor, there's
Mhm.
moorings. And so trying to anchor around the edges is tough, to find a place to
You
anchor.
talk about warnings in a minute too?
We can. Now, I'll show you by going, and I'll show you what happens if you decide to beef things up a little bit. On my boat, we're gonna, well, you know what, we're gonna come to a chart. I'll save it when we get to this chart about choosing anchors and so forth.
Joe,
And so,
Joe, before you get there, so with your boat, you've got 30 feet of chain. Is most of that chain on the bottom when you put it all out?
it's, well, I mean, it's what's attached to the anchor, so it's the first thing into the water.
Right.
So it's sitting on the bottom, and due to the weight of it, and it is a beast. Well, I'll show you right now. What I did was that I'm going to show you 2 illustrations here. The actual illustration is that when we get to a chart in a moment, it's going to tell you that the diameter of the metal in the links should be 1/4 inch, which would be, if you cut it, would be this.
Mm-hmm.
I went up 1/16 of an inch. If you cut it, that's 5/16. So that's 4/16. That's 5/16. Now, just for a better visual, I said, okay, let's make this bigger because it shows up better. So what I did was, I went to, so this one is 25% bigger than this one. It doesn't look like much. So just for a better visual, I said, okay, so here's a 1/2 inch, 4/8, and that's 5/8. So now you can see, oh yeah, there's quite a bit of difference there. Surprising part is that doing your 8th grade geometry in the Pythagorean, not the Pythagorean, area of a circle, and how much the area of this versus the area of this, the diameter increased by 25%. The surface area, how much metal is in there, increased by 57%, which meant that my chain that I'm using is 57% heavier than what was suggested for the boat. And it's twice as long as what I suggest for boats. Therefore, I can get away with a lot less road. You're on all chain. You might very well end up on 3-to-1. because you've got it all chained. It would have to be howling a hurricane to start pulling all that up off the bottom and endanger the dragging. Which is why people like all chain, because you don't have to put out that much. With the windlass, it's easy to come up. Mine's a beast to get up and out, but that's why I sized everything up. My anchor line is a little bit bigger as well. So, although the anchor line doesn't provide weight.
You get a good workout.
Yeah, or my crew does. So, all right, let's not get bogged down in this. Let me keep moving along here. So, drift alarms. Lowering your anchor, setting the anchor, confirming holding. Now I'm going to use Jim. Jim, we're going to do our demo. So how do you actually set the anchor? What do I suggest you do? So how do you want to set things? Mike, this is going to be in the way, so let me move that. So, I got a 32-foot boat. I'm at the wheel. I've got my motor running. We've come into the harbor. I've chosen my spot where I want us. You're going to be the guy in the front with the anchor. And I see you from here. And by the way, set your anchor rod up on your boat with these little marks. You can buy them in sets. They usually go 30, 60, 90, 150 and so forth. These are extras. You tuck them in and lay the anchor out in your driveway at home. Get out your big tape measure. All right, so if you will take all of this, you are going to be, we're going to start and drop, we're going to drop the anchor up by that wall. So he's my crew on the front. I've got all of this laid out. I always get everything out of your anchor well, wherever you do it first. Get it ready to go so that it goes over smoothly. And I've told Jim how much water we're going to be anchoring in, how much of the chain is going to end up in the water, and what I tell my crew is how much I want to get wet. So you go right back to the chair for a minute, right back up to the chair. So what I do is I've selected my spot where I want the anchor to go down, and in this case it's right where that chair is. Now the anchor is going to go there 30 feet away from me because he's up the front. And when we let it all out, boat's going to go back this way, and my boat's going to end up where I want it to be. I've done my calculations of, gee, I'm going to need 100 feet out or 90 feet out or whatever it is. So if the anchor goes there, how do you estimate 90 feet? There's no rulers or anything. I use my boat length. My boat's roughly 30 feet. I can figure out if I want my boat to end up back here, and I want 90 feet out, I look at it and say, there's a boat length, there's a boat length, there's a boat length. Okay, I want my anchor to go in that spot. When I'm done, my boat should end up where I want it. So we motor upwind into the wind, just like coming into a dock. You want to come up into the wind. And the most crucial part of it is make sure you bring the boat to a full stop. So I'm motoring real slow. And every single time I think the boat has stopped, it hasn't. I think I've come to a dead stop, and then I look to the side. And I look at a boat, I look at the house behind it on shore, and sure enough, I can tell we're still doing this. So I wait until we've come to a full stop. If needs be, I put the boat in reverse. When it's come to an absolute full stop, I give him the signal that he's been waiting for, which is lower the anchor until it touches bottom. And I've told him how much line to put out. And what I want to have happen is what you're going to watch right now. So this is the bottom of the ocean. There's the top of the water up there. And the wind's now going to take over, and it's going to blow me backwards. And when you blow a boat backwards in the wind and it's not tethered, what happens? The boat turns sideways. I'm not going to ask Jim to turn sideways, but okay, so the boat starts to drift, and the boat starts to drift sideways. And we start to drift back. I've told him that given the depth of the water, I'm going to call to him. And every time I call to him, I want him to let out 6 feet, which we won't do 6 feet, but let's do 3 feet. And as the boat drifts back, I'm going to say 6 feet, so let out 3 feet and come back toward me. And I'll say 3 feet, and the boat keeps drifting, the boat keeps drifting. And what I want him to do is when he gets, in this case, I've got marks out. I've got marks at 30, which is basically, I don't have one at 30 because that's where my shackle is at the end of the chain. But I've got a mark at 60, and what I will tell him is, all right, I want about half of it out first, And I'll say to him, when the 60-foot mark gets to the roller, about half of my total scope that I want out, I tell him to take a turn around the cleat, 360 degrees, and just hold. Just stop and hold. All I want to do is see if my anchor is going to start to set. So we get about halfway out, and I tell him to take a turn. Now I'll take the line from you, and so what will happen on the bottom, I hope, is that this is just what we've got is, instead of him putting everything over the side right away and ending up with that on the bottom of the ocean, by letting the boat drift back and having me say 6 feet, hopefully we've got something.
You're doing that as the boat's drifting
The
back.
boat's drifting back, he lets the line out and it goes to the bottom, and when we get about halfway, that's what it looks like on the bottom of the ocean. That's what I want. Now he takes a turn around the cleat. Now the line stops going out, the wind blows against the boat, and the boat all of a sudden now does this. And it catches, and it'll start to drag the anchor across the bottom, and hopefully it'll start to dig in a little bit. And sure enough it does, and the anchor comes to a stop, and the line gets tense, and the front of the bow faces the wind, the boat straightens out, and instantly I know, when the boat straightens out, that it started to dig in. So okay, but it's clearly only barely dug in. I will then tell him he knows what I'm gonna do. I say, I'm gonna put it in reverse. I shift into reverse, real soft reverse. I don't have a choice. I have a 13 horsepower diesel. There is no choice, it's a soft reverse. But I'm not trying to set it yet. I just wanna see if I give it a little tug on the anchor line with the engine, is it gonna hold? Is it gonna start to dig in? I just wanna know that it isn't gonna, take your foot off. I just wanna know it isn't gonna do that. If it does, I've only got 50 feet out. I can retrieve that fairly easily and reset. Presumably it sets. I give it a soft backwards, it's not moving, okay. I throttle down, put it in neutral, the tension comes off it. I tell him, take it back off the cleat, hold it, and start letting the line out. The boat's gonna drift backwards again, and I will have told him that when the 100-foot mark or whatever gets wet, or whatever distance I want from the roller to the anchor, whatever the length of the road is, when it gets to the roller, to then cleat it and do a permanent cleat. Okay? Hopefully we're set for the night, but now hopefully we are in the location we want to be for the night. Now I have to set the anchor for the night. We're going to come across some wording in here that says, do a short, quick burst in reverse. That's wrong. I don't like that wording at all. And they use versions of that a couple of times. I subscribe to Practical Sailor. 12 issues a year. It's like 4 sailors, but there's a ton of stuff in here. They do stuff on anchoring all the time. This was last year. Headline, anchoring in bad bottoms. Also during the year. Freeing stuck anchors. They do more testing on anchors, on anchor lines, on shackles, on everything you could think of. Huh?
Practical Sailor.
Practical Sailor.
Yeah,
It's good
I'm
for
a power
boats.
boater and I still subscribe to this. It's really,
Think of
really
it as
good.
the Consumer Reports for boats. They accept no advertising. They test stuff like crazy. Although everything from what's the best wax, what's the best cleaner, how do you get your stainless steel clean, to buying parts, to buying batteries. What about these new gel batteries? What's good, what's bad? I mean, they just give you a wealth of knowledge. I've got a stack of these things that finally when they get to be 10 years and they're this deep, I toss the old ones out, but they're great. So they test like crazy all the time, and they will tell you that the best way to set an anchor is what I'm forced to do, and that is I don't have a big engine, and putting it in reverse isn't as efficient as forward. Long, slow set. And I will put it in reverse, and I will try to put a good strain on it, and I will do that for about 45 seconds to a minute. I just sit there in reverse, and what I want is to put a strain on it, and if I am, that anchor is getting into the mud and the sand to deeper and deeper and deeper. Frankly, in many ways, what I'm trying to do is pull it out. If it's gonna pull out, I wanted to do it right now. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's
Right.
daylight, and I got my engine running. Let's get this thing to pull out. But if I try my darndest to get it pull out long and hard, what it's actually doing is setting deeper and deeper and deeper. Even if the god-awful thunderstorm surprises me at 2 a.m., the likelihood is that I'm staying put.
And with the windlass, we have the two pedals up there, and we have it on the dashboard too, but you have the person on the bow, when you say let it out, you can let it down and stop. Right, sit that, let 6 feet down.
But there are many people who just barely get it set and they don't, the minute it sits in the bottom and it tugs a little bit and the boat kind of stops going backwards, they think, okay, we're fine. But
Right,
what they haven't done is that long, slow pull and get that damn anchor into the mud.
but, and then once I do that, then we can let it out a little bit longer.
After, yes, and you can adjust it as you would need to, yes.
Right.
And at that point, I do 2 things. Have I actually been able to stop my boat between the 2 boats that I wanted to be between at the right spot? Am I too close to this guy? Am I too close to this guy? Did I get it right? And if I get it right, wrong, I pull it up and we do it again until we're in the right location. And then, once I am really satisfied and I have the engine off, can of beer opened, it's been 20 minutes, now I stop and again I do a range. And I sit there and I say, okay, so that power boat and this one, that power boat is lined up on that tree. And let's see, over here, I can see that sailboat's mast is right in front of the house on the shore over there. Okay. So if my boat moves and anything happens, I can quickly pop my head out and take a look and out. Have we moved or haven't we? Is the guy beside me starting to drag or is it me? And I remember what things are supposed to look like. So if I feel as though something's going wrong on the night. So that job of coming in and finding a place takes me about 45 minutes before I finally turn that engine off. Now, a couple of hints that they don't go into in this. When you go into a harbor and you're going to anchor for the night, anchor beside a boat like yourself. You guys should be anchoring beside power boats. You guys have flat bottoms. You've got a lot of sail area, a lot of cabin, more than I do. The wind hits you, man, you want to skitter across the harbor and skitter back again. Me, I've got a keel. I don't skitter. I move, but not nearly as much as you do. And so I don't want to be beside you. You shouldn't want to be beside me. I want to be among sailboats.
Right.
And the second thing, if I can work it, is I'd like to look at the boats beside me and see nylon road going over into the water. If the sailboats that I want to be beside, he's on chain, I'm going to keep moving because the likelihood is that he's going to be on 3-to-1. I'm going to try to be on 5-to-1 or 6-to-1. If the wind blows and we swing, I'm going to swing more than they are. I don't really want to be beside them. So trying to find the right place. I want the right bottom. I want to be far enough from shore. I don't want to be too close to the other boats. I don't want to be in 40 feet of water. I don't want to be in 3 feet of water. I don't want to be near that power boat. He's on chain. You got to put all these things together. That's why it takes 45 minutes for me by the time I figure out where I'm going to be. It's tough these days, and so therefore having the extra chain and the extra weight allows me to stay on a shorter road because most people have no clue about what we're talking about and very often have way too little anchor road out and aren't going to swing anywhere near like I am. So I keep it as short as I can and pray.
And if they don't swing, there's an opportunity for that anchor to come up because they're gonna be too tight with it, right?
Yeah, a lot of things can go wrong, there's no question. So those are the things that we would like to have happen. So as I say, what looks good on paper and what actually happens out in the harbors are 2 different things. Okay. Yeah. Oh, where's my sound?
Taking into account all relevant factors, including weather and tidal conditions, the type of seabed where you plan to boat, and the size and weight of your boat. Check with area boaters and anchor and size for your boat and expected anchoring, taking into account all relevant factors, including weather and tidal conditions, the type of seabed where you plan to boat, and the size and weight of your boat. Check with area boaters and marinas for help determining the best type of anchor for local conditions. Next, attach a chain of appropriate weight and strength to prevent chafing and help your anchor set by weighing down the line at a horizontal angle. A 6 to 10 foot chain is sufficient for most recreational boats. Then attach a line of appropriate weight and strength. Its length should be approximately 10 times the depth of the deepest area where you expect to anchor.
Place the anchor, chain, and line, called rode when used with an anchor, neatly coiled and ready for use in your boat's anchor locker or bow pulpit. Permanently attach the end of the rode to a fitting in the locker or a cleat on the bow of your boat before you start the anchoring process so you don't lose your anchor. Plan to anchor in an area that is clear of boat traffic and other environmental hazards. If unfamiliar with the area, consult a chart that will show the type of seabed, such as sand, mud, or rocks. Carefully inspect the anchorage for sufficient space to drift a full 360 degrees with a radius 10 times the depth of the water where you intend to drop anchor, and conduct a proper lookout. Plan the correct scope or length of rode depending on conditions as a multiple of the water depth plus boat height to bow connection point. 7 times that distance for normal conditions, 5 times for light conditions, or 10 for windy conditions. Use a depth finder or chart to determine how deep the water is. Measure your properly scoped rode using line marks or arm spans, which are approximately 6 feet for adults. Then tie off the anchor rode after measuring at the predetermined point. Brief your onboard guests on the anchoring plan and their individual responsibilities. Slow your boat to minimum control speed and bring it to a stop at the intended anchor point. Maintain your position and start to lower the anchor, ensuring that the rode does not become tangled until the anchor strikes bottom. Then use a slow, smooth backwards maneuver to set the anchor. Continue slowly backing up and putting out the full length of rode, usually 7 times the distance from the attachment
Well, he's
point
sitting in no
on your
wind,
bow to the seabed.
so he'd have to reverse.
Confirm that the rode is securely attached to its bow cleat and use a small short burst of power in reverse to set the anchor.
See that
Turn
small
off
short
the
burst?
engine. Periodically, about once an hour, check to ensure your anchor is holding. Compare your location to stationary objects on land.
So as I say, a couple of things there I don't agree with, but generally a pretty good presentation.
So Joe, if you do have all chain, how would you change those scopes?
As I say, most people on chain anchor with a 3-to-1 ratio.
3 to 1 can't be enough. 3 to 1 can't be enough.
Well, if it's all chain.
I would say 3 to 1, 5 to 1, and 7 to 1, or something along those lines. But you mean 3 to 1 overnight on a windy night?
Well, I don't know. I don't worry about that because I don't have all chain. I just know that most people anchor on less. Again, the more you can put down there, the safer you'll be. But most people with all chain do not put out that much scope.
Yeah.
And even if they do, the chain is what's anchoring the boat to the bottom, not the actual anchor, because there's so much chain. If the wind blows, it takes a howling storm to lift the chain off the bottom and actually put a strain on the anchor itself. So the point is that they don't move far from where I see the boat sitting. Even if the wind changes, they may not move very far. I will, because I got a lot of nylon line. All right.
Question, the distance markers, do they start from the shackle?
Right.
Okay.
So I lay my anchor out on the driveway. The first 30 feet is the chain. I go up 30 feet of anchor rode, which is nylon line. The next mark is 60, and I put the 60 there. Another 30 feet, I put the 90 in, and so forth.
When your period at anchor is complete, as the first step in getting underway, complete a full.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
What's that?
Do the tags get caught up in the windlass? The other way to do that is to actually, especially if you're all chain, you can paint your
Many
chain.
people will do that. They'll get a can
It'll
of spray
wear
paint,
off, but I mean, you can paint the chain.
get a spray can, and the red is 30 feet, and the blue is 60 feet, and the green is 90 feet, or what have you. And then you don't have to worry about them at all.
Way to go. So,
Now, so when you're gonna go pick the boat up, it's the reverse of the situation. I have the person at the bow, he knows he can see the anchor road, I can't, because it's going over the bow. And so the idea is I want to move the boat ahead just enough so that she is able to pull the nylon line in, feed it right into my anchor locker, so as it comes up over the boat. I'm sort of guessing how fast to go, and that's where the hand signals for go a little faster or slow down come in handy. And if I've drifted off and the anchor road's going that way, signal, anchor road's going off that way, a signal, and so forth. If I'm overrunning it, you know, stop the engines and let the person catch up and so forth, and I'll get all those hand signals ready so that I move the boat where the person on the bow wants the boat to go, so that they can comfortably get that line in your case, up at the bow of the boat, and you're working the windlass and so forth, that you're not overrunning the anchor and the chain. And then finally, in my case, pop it out of the bottom and then try to drag that sucker up on board, which is always a challenge. So, fore and aft anchoring, there would be very limited conditions. I would rather not do it, but there may be some cases where you want a bow and stern anchor. If you are in a river and there is space to each side of the main channel for anchoring, that would be okay if there's enough deep water, but you certainly don't want to be swinging out at night into the middle of the channel, or even daytime or nighttime swinging out into the channel. And so you may want to do a fore and aft anchoring. In order to do that, here we go, next one. Nope, that's Bahamian mooring. Other times people, especially in runabouts, will want to go and anchor off a beach. And so they would put the bow anchor down first, get it set properly, and then let out more scope on the bow, let the boat come backwards, either toward the beach or if it's beside a river far enough back, drop another anchor, motor forward, have somebody taking in the excess line on the bow, somebody letting out the line back here. This anchor again is set, move forward so you don't overrun the line, move far enough forward and cleat it, put the boat in forward to move forward a bit, setting the anchor here. And then finally, once that anchor set, adjust the anchor lines so that the boat will sit comfortably for the night at high tide, low tide, between the two anchors, and it isn't going to drift out into the middle of the harbor, also out into the middle of the busy channel. And if you're up against a beach where everybody's lined up on this beach, you don't want to swing over into that guy or swing into this guy. Again, literally the stern anchor may be carried ashore and dug into the beach sand. And that's you're barely away from the shore, just enough to keep the engines out of the sand. But it keeps you from swinging side to side. And because of course you want to be at the beach facing out no matter what the wind is doing. So if the wind is blowing sideways, it keeps you in place and so forth. So there are limited situations where you might use a stern anchor. I only had to do it once down the Caribbean many, many years ago in a peculiar area where I did have to anchor off the beach.
Then you gotta remember that you gotta get both of those anchors back up again.
And then
That's the next thing.
you got to
Which one do
reverse.
you go first?
You get the back one off first, and you get the beach anchor out onto the boat first.
One has the benefit of the windlass and the other one probably doesn't.
So what happens, so if that's the case, to get to the aft one, you would let some windlass chain out to drift over so to get over it, right?
You'd reverse again, and you would perhaps use your engine to back down.
Right.
You'd have to have help to make sure that you're pulling lines in and they don't wrap, you don't get the line wrapped around your propeller. You have to be letting it off at the bow, taking in at the stern. You have to be guiding your boat back straight and so forth. If you're at a beach, yes, you would have to get ready. In many cases, if people have outboards that they've tilted up to get close to the beach, they have to leave the anchor on the shore for a minute, add some extra scope to that, pull in on the bow, move away from the shore a bit, get the two motors down, get the single motor, two motors down in the water. Now you can finally start the engines, get that anchor up, get it back onto the boat, get the crew back onto the boat, and now you can motor out and take up your bow anchor. If it's a windy day, if there's lots of boats around, it takes some practice, it takes some skill. It isn't something for the first time you've ever done it to be doing it on a windy day at a beach with a crowded beach.
With a lot of people looking at you.
Oh, yeah.
And don't presume that other people standing on the beach, when you say, would you give me a hand, that they have a clue what
They'll be
you're
doing this to
doing.
you.
They're better off if they do that, rather than try to help you and screw it up, because
They
they
don't
don't
get
know. Yeah. So. Bahamian moorings is very unusual. It's done with chain and chain, shackling to each other. That is very limited situations. I'm not even going to pretend to teach you how to do it, because it's for very, very limited situations. If you do have to set two anchors because you're cruising, you have to go hide in some little place because there's a gale coming and you want to set two anchors out, it can be done. They suggest, for example, if you can get into a sheltered area and actually tie the stern of the boat on shore to something that won't pull out, get the anchor set, maybe, if you can find just the right place. Same situation. Anchor the bow anchor first, get a line to shore, tie it off to something very heavy, very solid. Leave a little bit of slack to try to keep you in place, maybe. Fouled anchors. If you do anchor in a spot where you know that there might be crud on the bottom and you can't help it, now there's rocks, they say it's a little bit rocky or somebody's warned you about it, then what you can do is you can put a trip line, thank you, a trip line on the anchor. That anchor doesn't have anything. Many anchors will have near the end, if it was an anchor like this, might have a hole right there to which you could attach a line. You attach a seat cushion, you attach a fender, just enough line at high tide to get it to the surface. Straight up, right over the anchor. Now, if this gets caught on something on the bottom and you can't pull it out, it's under a rock, a big rock, a ledge or something, and you can't pull it out, well, this line goes to the surface. You can pull on that line. You can tie it off to the boat and motor slowly forward, relieving this. Now the line is pulling from here, and with luck, it will pull it out from under the rock. You have to have a place to shackle it. You have to have the float on it. You have to have just enough line to get it to the surface. If you have a choice, don't anchor in a place that might do that to you. We around here luckily have lots and lots of good anchorages, and that should seldom be a problem. I did once have a problem up in Maine where I got it caught, I don't know what on what, and it was a nice day. The anchor line at low tide, 10-foot tides up there, tide had gone out, the boat had drifted because there was no wind, and line got tangled up on stuff on the bottom on some of the ledges. And for a while I was thinking, oh, this could be really bad, but I just took my time and said, now where did I anchor and where's that line likely going? And all of a sudden it just came free, and I was like, oh thank God.
Yes,
I don't know what I did, but it worked. So be patient. And with the trip line, if need be, you can just tie off and dump the whole line in the water, let it sink to the bottom, go get a diver, come back and have him go down where the trip line is and the float's still on the surface, and pay a diver to free it up, and now you get your gear back. Not convenient, but you get your gear back.
Or you buy a new anchor.
Well, you
Right.
can buy a new anchor, which is
And chain.
Now, selecting equipment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can open any magazine, you can go to West Marine, any place online, and find recommendations as to which anchor is best for you, what kind of, how much chain you need, and so forth. I'm giving you some suggestions, and I'm saying if anything, beef things up. The only thing I will tell you that you absolutely positively must be sure of is be sure any of the equipment that you're buying that's made out of metal is made in the USA. Be very, very careful. that there's a lot of stuff out there made overseas, and buy American product. If there's two chains that have identical specs and one is 50% more per foot, I almost guarantee you that it's made in the US and the other one's made overseas somewhere else. Don't trust it. You're gonna save $2 a foot on the chain and you could lose your boat. There's a lot of crap out there. I won't try to tell you what's the best anchor. Ask 10 experienced people what's the best anchor and you'll get 8 different answers. Do your own research, talk to as many people as you can. Just do the best you can. There's no question about it. The most popular is this Danforth style. Danforth is a brand name. It's like saying Kleenex instead of facial tissue. But it's sort of become generic. If held a gun to my head and said, I need a general all-around anchor, I'm gonna anchor once in a while, what should I have? Okay, go buy a Danforth anchor, but buy a good one. Look at how they're made and whether or not. I have seen anchors like this. This isn't great. Is by no means, this is a dinghy anchor, so it's not made to high levels. This just wraps a piece of metal around, and I think they weld it here and they weld it here. But there is no welding in here to get this anchored. Get it anchored, sorry for the pun. To attach that. So this is not the strongest anchor in the world. It's light. It's made for a dinghy or something just a little bigger than a dinghy. For a boat like you have, you're talking about buying an anchor for a 30 or 40 footer. If you buy something like this, make sure you can look at it and say, that's a beefy anchor. It's got the weight. It's made in America. It looks as though it's well crafted and so forth. And if you don't know, get some advice about the quality of the anchor. Don't be guessing. Well worth it. What's your boat worth? What's it worth to have a good night's sleep? Get the good stuff. All kinds of things we'd like an anchor to be. Gee, we'd like it to be lightweight so it's easy to put up and down, but lightweight may not set as well. We'd like it to align beautifully, just drop right in place, and then if the wind blows and the boat swings 90 degrees, that it doesn't pop out, it simply resets in the mud. It stays right there and it just resets itself. We'd like that in an anchor. We want it to penetrate the bottom easily, quickly, stay put, have good holding power. The wind blows, it doesn't pull out, it just digs in nice and deep. And after it's dug in nice and deep, we want it to get out easy. We don't want much, we just want everything. And then ease of stowing. That's a lot of things to ask out of an anchor. And every anchor does some things better than others. Some anchors are better in certain bottoms than others, and then that's where Practical Sailor comes in and tests these things and said, well, is this anchor really as good in gravel as it says? And they test one anchor against the other. I read all this stuff and I come to the conclusion there is no perfect anchor. If there was, we'd all use the same one. On my boat, I will show you what I use. I like it. It isn't necessarily for you, but it's what I like, and I actually carry a big Danforth and a Delta, which we'll see in a minute. So there are, they call them the flat flukes. These plows, the first one that came along had a hinge on it, made in England, called CQR, a play on the word secure. I own the Delta, which is on the right. Notice they're both plow types. That has no hinge on it. It's always held for me. I like it. It's a very popular anchor, but I also carry a large second anchor if I need it, which is a large
My boat came with the one on the left. My
Your boat comes with those?
Yeah,
Well, they're
it's
certainly,
big and it's heavy.
they are certainly, yours probably weighs twice as much. Huh?
You got a Danforth, I think.
Yeah, and that's a good all-around anchor. If it's big enough and good quality, you're fine with that. There are claw anchors that are supposedly better. This has become the hottest thing going. It's got that roll bar so that if it hits the bottom, it automatically goes over on its side. The idea of mine, and it's got a lot of weight to it. Now notice this, for example, if you look at this and you say, can you see all the welding there and so forth? I mean, this is made to take some abuse. They're well-made anchors. Oops, going the wrong way. On mine, what you can't see is that if you looked underneath this, back to here, it's all solid metal, and that's designed to make the point of the anchor go down into the mud and set quicker and so forth. So they all have different features that make them work well. I've been happy with it. The roll bar is supposed to be a good feature on that, and the fact that it's concave, sort of like a spoon. They think it sets better, holds better than the plow type. They may be right. that's good for your inflatable dinghy. Clearly it isn't going to dig in very much, but neither will it poke a hole in one of the balloons on the dinghy. Grapnel hooks are not really anchors. Yes, for a dinghy it would do okay on the beach to just set it into the beach sand and keep your dinghy on the beach and not drift away. Some version of that you could use to retrieve the anchor you lost on the bottom, but certainly not designed for heavy duty use on even if you owned a boat like this. That's not the anchor for you. And they talk about some fishing boats in shallow water can put down these poles. Apparently, I'm not a fisherman, I'm not familiar with them, but basically just put down a piling and hold the boat there. They don't have to worry about tides, presumably don't have to worry about high winds. So no anchor at all, just down it goes.
Never saw that.
I haven't seen it, but I'm not a fisherman, so
They
fresh
have a
water.
lot down south in the bayous
Yeah.
and stuff like that. You have to be in shallow water to make that
Yeah,
work.
really shallow. It's just going on a few feet, but it's a good idea. Just stick a pole in the water and the boat stays put. Stick it in the mud. You'd like a place to keep them. Many of them will have some kind of, you can buy for the anchor, if it's a Danforth, the one reason that people like it is that it's flat. And so yes, you can buy a cleat, a fixture here, a clamp to hold it on the rail, add a couple of nylon lines to keep it from bouncing around and so forth, and it'll sit right on the bow rail. And or it stows flat. There are deck cleats that you can use, deck fittings and so forth. Others where you open a well up front and you can do that cross bar and set it right there, and the anchor just hangs in place, and down below it is all your chain and your line and your anchor well up at the front of the boat. This is where you can sit here and gaze at these things all day. How long is my boat? Different kinds of anchors, the weight of the anchor, what's suggested. These are all suggestions. I took those things and beefed them up for my boat. And so I have a non-hinged plow, and they're recommending a 22 pound. I went to a 35 pound. As I said, I upped everything just because I knew I was going to be in crowded areas and I wanted to have
Is
a
your
lot more weight.
Danforth a Fortress?
No, it came with a boat. It's an old one. I have no idea, but it's a big
heavy.
It's a big heavy one, yeah. It's also probably 28 to 30 pounds. is my
Yeah.
guess. Nylon ankle line, I recommend highly. Yes, first of all, nylon only, not polyester. Polyester does not stretch. We want stretch in a line for shock absorbing, so that it doesn't kick in rough seas. If the wind's blowing and a boat goes by and throws up a wake, it'll absorb a lot of the shock as the pull goes on the line. So you want nylon, not polyester, and 3-strand nylon has more stretch per foot than does the braided. So nylon first and foremost, and the 3-strand for an anchor line. You may wish at a dock, if you're tied up to the dock all the time, the stretch may not be an advantage, and you may prefer the ease of handling of a braided line for a dock line. But for an ankle line, I recommend the 3-strand. And well spliced with a good thimble here for your shackles, so that you've got metal on metal. When you buy the chain, there's 2 types. This is the type that typically is, notice the size of the link. These links are a little longer. A BBB is designed for your capstans. That's what must be the chain that is on the boat now, because that's the type of chain that's used when you've got a capstan and fits what they call the gypsy, like the sprocket that pulls the chain up. You have to, because the chain has to fit the gypsy. If it doesn't, it's not going to pull it out of the water. Then there is proof coil, the cheap stuff, which if you were going to anchor almost never is just fine. Frankly, my anchor chain is proof coil, but it's thicker and heavier, and it's American made. There is also high test, and it's even stronger. It's still steel. It's not stainless steel, but it is engineered somehow, I don't know how, to be stronger, and therefore allows for the same strength with a narrower gauge steel, so it isn't so heavy to pull up. But both of these are designed to be pulled up by hand and not go through a capstan. BBB coil is designed to go through a capstan. Just make sure the quality is what you expect. Well galvanized, American made. Here again, they talk about the line itself and the nylon line. They're suggesting 3-strand. There's now new stuff that's 12-strand. That looks ultra braided. They talk about the different chains and so forth. I'm not going to take time on this. Again, it gets into all of that thing. We saw a thing about what we wanted, that page where we showed how many different attributes we wanted in anchors. Well, guess what? There's all kinds of attributes in nylon lines and chains and so forth. One of the reasons you absolutely want chain, at least at the bottom, is not only for the weight that we've talked about, keep that on the flat on the bottom so as the wind pulls, it keeps the anchor flat and pulls the anchor into the mud. But the other part of it is that abrasion. The boat swings, it drags across the bottom. The chain is definitely going to be dragging. You don't want, it'll resist the wear, obviously, much better than nylon line. So you certainly want the first part of the chain to be, first part of the road to be chained, if not all the road to be chained.
Do you have 3/8 on your boat?
The 3/8 what, chain? No, I went up a 16th. That was the chart I showed you this thing. I went up from 1/4 to 5/16. But as I say, it upped the surface area of that circle by 57%. So it's actually more than half, again, as heavy, as thick, as strong as that 1/16 gave me a lot. And that's all it took, was a 1/16 of an inch. Windlass use. Actually, they set mine up. Geez, you know what? Maybe I do have BBB coil, because they set mine up, done this well. I guess they asked me. No, I must have proof coil. When I had mine made up years ago, they actually spliced the rope right onto the anchor chain for me. They asked me, did I want shackles or did I want that? And when they told me that they believed that this was as good or better than putting on a shackle, I believed them. You think you have all chain on that boat? There's no line whatsoever
I
coming
think
off?
this is fine, I don't think it's.
Oh, you think there is nylon line?
I think there is, yeah.
Okay, then yours must be done this way. Oops.
Because we talked about it last year in the class about maybe switching the chain.
Because a shackle here clearly is not going to get through that. So if you would have to have it spliced in order to get chain and line through. You won't get a shackle through there. So in my case right there, I could have, if I wished, a shackle, and I would have that thimble in the end of the line, and I'd have the shackle go through that, metal on metal working against each other. Okay. We've talked about scope, the changes in depth. That's what we did here with our foam. I won't go over it again. You saw how that works. This difference between an absolute rod straight line and the sag in the line or the sag in the chain. And here's more chain here, so this is the sag in the nylon line. That's called a catenary. If the wind picks up, that starts, the arc starts to disappear, not entirely. And notice that the chain is starting to pull up off the bottom. This is why lots of weight, lots of chain is good to keep the chain on the bottom for just as long as possible, to keep that anchor deep in the mud, even when the wind blows. So this is also what helps provide shock absorbency. If a wind picks up, that this distance starts to shrink down, the boat goes back a bit, but it isn't with a jolt every time it gets hit by a wave or a gust. It takes the pressure off your cleats, takes the pressure off you. All chain, even when the wind blows, as we can see here, you may get it not to lift at all off the bottom in that section. But this is what happens, is the chain actually becomes the anchor, so to speak. And this is why a boat like this, or yours with all chain, wouldn't drift very far, and I don't want to be beside you, because I'll drift a lot farther than you. Snubbers on all chain work nicely. A piece of nylon that goes from the cleat to a special hook engineered just for this, hooks on the line. And so the chain takes the strain, but if there's a wake from a boat that makes a pull, this provides some shock absorbency with the nylon line. It has to be as strong as the chain. You don't want that being the weak spot in your anchoring system.
That helps take the strain off the windlass.
And it, yes, so that things aren't tugging against the windlass, that's right, that's another major portion of it, is that it now puts the strain onto a nylon line that goes to a cleat, instead of,
Now, does the chain go through that little hooking device on the nylon rope?
so this is sort of like this, and it's
Yeah.
designed to go fit right around the link.
Right, but the links come through it, right?
The links go right through it, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
It looks like this, and
Alright.
it just hooks onto the link,
okay.
just like that.
yeah, that's what you see there. It's hooked onto a link. And of course, because of the weight of the chain, it's not gonna come out.
Mm.
And even if it does, well, it's still attached to the boat and your windlass, but I can't imagine how that could come loose. They're engineered to fit the chain. They're engineered
Excellent.
not to come loose until you take it out.
They're not cheap either, but it's worth every penny in my opinion.
They're a good thing. It keeps, and you can get big rubber ones, big heavy duty rubber ones that.
And when you put that on, after you lay your line out?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you're all done, then you set that in place. Take a little bit of strain off then you let the chain sag. After you've got it cleated, you let the chain sag a bit, that relieves all the pressure on your windlass. If you are using chain to rope and you are putting a shackle on the chain, one thing you want to make sure you've done is seized what you don't want to have happen is to have this on the bottom. And so let's presume we've got the thimble and the nylon line going this way. You don't want this down underwater to loosen up on you. Yes, they could loosen up, especially if you're anchored for a couple of days. So you want that to stay put. So you can buy stainless steel wire. Now, what did I use here? Maybe after all the years of playing with this, it finally broke. But you can buy stainless steel wire. That's broken, but you can see what it does is simply keeps that from turning.
Mm.
It's just enough to keep it from turning and pulling out.
Wow.
I'll have to re-seize that again. I'll have to replace it, but that's all it does.
This one's tight, you can really do it, did you?
Well, yes, but you know, a couple of days in the bottom of the ocean,
Yeah.
you don't want to be wondering, I wonder if that's still in there. Again, good sleep at night. So seize them, and because presumably once you make up nylon rode anchor and chain, shackles, you're keeping it together. You're not taking it apart.
Mm.
It's going to stay together forever until it's
Good.
time to really replace something. And you're going to take it home, hose it down, hang it up on the shed. Next spring, pull it out and throw it back on the boat again. You're not taking it apart, it's staying together. So do it once and it'll stay together for you. All right, let's talk briefly about Sentinels. We're not going to do either of you have paddle craft kayaks? We're not going to talk about a paddle craft and anchoring. I can't even imagine. Minimizing swinging at anchor, something called kedging, shade protection, and marking the road. So, if you're in an area where you are concerned about if you're anchoring in a river and it's a tidal river or there's a strong tides in the harbor you're in, I ran into one up in Maine where there were the tides actually created a current within the harbor, and you're worried about there's not much wind, and will my boat start drifting around and turn around and do loop-de-loops in the middle of the night, and the next thing I know I've got my rod tied up on my propellers on my inboard because I didn't have enough wind in the night. If I had enough wind, the boat would have stayed straight, the line would have run off the bow, but the wind died down, the tides and so forth, and the boat starts to turn and shift and do this and that, and the next thing you know, how the hell did us guys with big rudders hanging off the back, and if you've got You got inboards on that boat,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you got rudders too.
Yeah.
And it's possible to hang those damn things up on the rudders or the
Right.
props. And if you're saying, geez, it's a lot of tide or current in here and the wind's gonna be light and we might do some drifting around in the night. So it's a nice thing is to hang a sentinel. And what you would do is nylon line, you'd go find that shackle,
Mm-hmm.
put it over the nylon line, screw it together, seize it up. To the shackle attach maybe a little anchor, maybe that dinghy anchor we saw, that black mushroom anchor.
Yeah.
Something with some weight to it, okay? And lower it now on the shackle, tie a line, so you've got a line to it, the shackle, and you've got an anchor, little anchor on the shackle, and an anchor, shackle, and a line. And you lower it on the shackle part way down the line, and actually what you want to do is not have a touch bottom, but get quite a way, more than halfway down, I'd suggest, to the water depth. If you're in 15 feet of water, get it 6, 7, 8, 9 feet below the surface. Don't have it hit the bottom, have it hanging off the bottom. What it will do, because of the weight of it, is it will tend to keep this line straight down to where this is now called a sentinel, where the sentinel is, and then head for the anchor. And if the boat starts to drift in circles, this line should be always hanging straight off the bow and won't have a tendency, as this boat goes forward, this is all going to go with it. And even if it starts turning circles, it is far less likely that this is going to start dragging down the side of the boat and ooh, whoops, right over the rudder or something else. So if you're in this situation, strong currents that change, no wind, strong tides, and you're saying we could be doing a little dance here tonight,
Mm-hmm.
put a sentinel on it, and it will keep that line straight down at the bow, and you should be fine. Not going to talk about this. I can't imagine carrying any kind of an anchor and all the stuff it requires on a paddle boat. Some large power boats, yours is set up for a riding sail. He's got a Grand Banks. It's got the little mast on the boom in the back. You say, what the hell's that for? Well, a lot of you power boats do a lot of swinging, a lot of dancing, and it can drive you nuts because you're doing this all day long. And so a riding sail, whether it's on a sailboat or on his boat, the little sail at the back of the boat, it's like the feathers on an arrow. You take the feathers off an arrow and fire the shaft
It's like a counterweight type of thing.
like a wind vane. The heavy part of the back keeps the arrow of the wind vane pointing forward toward the wind all the time. Wind shifts this thing at the back of the wind vane, keeps it pointing toward the wind. Take it off and all of a sudden that arrow does this. Same reason a flag does this. And so if your boat has a tendency to do that, if you can set up either on a sailboat like that, because some sailboats do it, on his boat, a small sail is made to go on that, and it keeps the boat settled in one place.
Yes, aft,
Hmm?
at the stern.
So yes, that's the bow. It's on the back of the boat, just as on a wind vane, the tail end of the wind vane is away from the wind. So that will keep the bow faced into the wind and far less swing. On a multi-hull, how do you anchor? You set up a bridle, and then the single anchor chain goes off of that. Kedging. Kedging is another great theory. I defy anybody to pull it off. The proposal here is you've managed to take your multi-bazillion dollar boat and weren't paying attention and ran it right up on the mud flat, and you're stuck. And the tide's going out, and oh, we got to get off this thing. How are we going to do this? Okay, I know what we'll do. We'll get out our little Zodiac. We'll put a 20-pound anchor into it. We will tie a line onto it. Our anchor bite that we just learned when we started this class. We'll just tie a line onto it, and we will go out here a good long distance and letting the line out as we go, and we will drop it to the bottom. and then we will come back to the boat and we'll start pulling on this line, and we'll just pull our boat right off the mud flat, like magic.
Works every time.
Every time. It is like, are you kidding me?
It looks like you got that around the propeller, if you're backing up.
Well, yeah. This I defy anybody to. If
I've
you've
never
put,
done it.
if you've managed to put the boat up on a mud flat, and you think you're gonna put, because that I'm guessing is not too far off from the image of what boat you and Scott own.
Right.
It looks a
Very
lot
close.
like that. So we're talking 20,000 pounds, maybe more, and you're gonna pull this thing off. You are not. You are not. And then the whole concept of you're gonna have an anchor in it. Anyway, that's the theory. If you accomplish it, please let me know.
Got it. We'll put that on our checklist.
Chafe protection, if you were gonna be anchored for many days, maybe a week, and your anchor line is going out over the bow of the boat, even if it's a roller, there's some friction there. Especially on my boat, or if you're at a dock and it's going out through a chock in the side of the boat and so forth, not over a roller, even if it is, it's gonna be there for a week. You anchored for a week or something, put some chafe protection on it. It can be almost anything. You can buy chafe protection at West Marine, and they come ready to go, and they're Velcro, and you can stitch them a little bit in place, or it'll stay in place where you want it. They're kind of cool because they have Velcro hooks on the side that goes to the line. So when you wrap it, it's got all these hooks on the inside, which stick to the line, and then it Velcros onto itself. So when you put it over the roller or wherever, it stays. It doesn't slide on you. It doesn't slide on the line. It works pretty well. And temporary, it gives you something sacrificial. If anything's going to wear out due to excessive wear and tear, or you're leaving the boat for a week or two and so forth, and you want to be sure that if anything wears out, make it the $20 chafing gear and not the $400 piece of anchor line. So chafe protection is great. And of course on my mooring, where I'm always have it going out through a chock, and it's again a nylon line, that's on permanently all the time on my mooring line. We talked about marking the road. These are inexpensive. Should be $5 a set. These days they're probably 20. Mooring and rafting. Picking up a mooring. Picking up a mooring is very much like going into dock, and in many ways much easier. If you're going to pick up a mooring, yeah, it's going to take two people, somebody on the bow, somebody at the engine, at the controls, and what you want to do is to
Confirm that your passengers
approach
are approved
upwind.
and briefed on your arrival plan and understand their individual responsibilities and are ready to proceed. Approach the mooring at an appropriate angle, considering the wind and current, and at minimum control speed using intermittent throttling. If possible, come alongside the mooring on the helmsman's side to keep it in sight during the approach, and with your bow pointed into the wind or current, whichever is stronger, for maximum control. Have your line handler ready at the bow, wearing a life jacket in a safe position with a boat hook, and able to use hand signals to direct the helmsman as needed. When you are approximately 1 boat length away, shift smoothly into neutral to glide forward, and stop within 12 inches of the mooring. In a strong wind or current, use extra power to maintain the boat's position. Shift gently into reverse if needed to stop the boat. Use the boat hook to pick up the mooring pennant or line, and secure it to a bow cleat.
When I pick up my mooring and I've got somebody on the bow, I approach upwind, and I approach so goddamn slowly they think they're gonna have to take a nap before I get there. And I do it on purpose because I don't want to overrun it, and they don't have to use a boat hook. I've actually got one of those whips on a float that's floating that they can, sits this high off the water, so that when they get close, it comes just about up to the height of my bow roller, and they can just reach over and grab it and pull it up. But it's sitting there in the water doing this, and so I approach very, very slowly so they have time to grab it and pull it up and get it on board, and do it very, very, very slowly. Approach slowly into the wind, just enough speed so that you know you're still moving forward. Keep just enough speed on, and then give that person on the front who may not have done it a million times, especially if they're using a boat hook, time to hook the line, start to pull it up, realize that the end of the line they need is still down there, and they're gonna have to fiddle with it, and what do I do with the hook, and what do I do with the line, and so forth, and you don't wanna be overrunning it, you don't wanna be falling back off it, and all of a sudden they're trying to hold the boat and keep the boat from drifting away. Approach slowly, just as you would a dock.
Do all moorings have a line? You just can't see it in the water, right?
If you were to rent a transient mooring, just instead of a transient slip, yes, transient moorings will have some sort of a pickup line. They may even have what I have, which is pickup line with a loop, and then that little buoy with the fiberglass stick on the top, so you don't even need the boat hook. You can just pick it up. And either one, yes, they will always have it. Now, if you just pull up to a mooring and you don't know whose it is, and somebody put a mooring up but there's no pickup line on it, you're kind of screwed. So now, interestingly, if you go to Cuttyhunk, you keep your boat there?
Marina Bay.
You're in Marina Bay. Cuttyhunk is the last of the Elizabeth Islands off of South Dartmouth and the Buzzards Bay.
I love this.
You can rent moorings there, and what they've got is a round ball like that. Then up comes thick, heavy post with an eye in the end, and it sits about this high off the water, maybe a little higher. And you have to have presumably a dock line ready, and I have to be able to motor up to it, and I have to allow my person on the bow to put the loop of the dock line over a cleat, go out over the bow roller, and I motor up to that loop bouncing around in the water, and I have to keep control of the boat so that they can get the line through it and bring it back to the boat and cleat it off, and that becomes the pickup pennants, but it's my dock line. So that takes a little practice.
Is there
But-
any calculation to the length of the
Well, again, these would typically be made up by the marina who is renting it to you. On mine at the marina, I have a mooring. Yes, part of my fee is I pay them to rent that to me, and it so happens that that length is mandated by the town because the town recently worked with the marina to reset all the moorings, and they wanted to be, they discovered that those of us that were out there for years, we had been able to supply these. And when in fact I still do, when I arrive in the spring, I've got only that much. And I have to go in and put my boat at the dock, jump in my dinghy, and I bring this with me, row out there, and attach it for the summer. But now that, I used to have a really long one, had it for years. And when they reset the moorings, they said it can't be that long because I'll be swinging, like in that anchorage, I'll be swinging into the guy behind me. So I had to have a new one made. That's all right, it was 20 years old. And they shortened it up to a certain length. But they're typically long enough so that from there to your bow roller, I find you usually have no less than 8 feet, often 12 feet. It's sufficient.
Where do you have your boat, Joe?
In Fairhaven, but when I say Fairhaven, most people know Fairhaven as one half of New Bedford Harbor. But I'm on another area that's faces the Cape Cod Canal, facing Mattapoisett. But Buzzards Bay. Departing a mooring is, again, pretty
When
intuitive.
departing a mooring, check to ensure that the propulsion unit is clear. Start the engine, release the line, and maneuver the boat at idle speed away from the mooring. Ensure that all lines remain clear and free from the propulsion unit. Do not bump into the mooring buoy, and be careful to clear other boats in the mooring area, maintaining a no-wake speed.
Easy peasy.
Again, similar to an anchor, if the wind's blowing, it's going to be hard for somebody on the bow to get the loop off, perhaps get the loop off of that. If the wind is blowing in the morning at 15 knots, maybe there's a lot of strain. and you might have to move the boat forward a few feet, take the strain off the mooring line, and the loop can come off. Almost all of those moorings, when you pick them up, they've got a good sized loop. This might be darn close to the size of the cleat on the bow of your boat, my boat, and the loop might be from this end to where it closes down. It might be all the way back to here. It's a good idea to get a small piece of scrap line, something 1/8 of an inch, about that long, and come in here and tie it around the throat tight, and then go over the top of the cleat with it, so there's no chance of this great big loop in any way, shape, or form coming off. You pull this all the way back, tie a piece of small line around it, tie it tight, and then tie it over this, so there's no way that this thing can come off. Not likely that it'd pop off, but why take a chance? Plan for stupid things and you'll be fine. Rafting. Now this is something a lot of us would probably like to do, is raft up with our buddies. Go into a harbor for the night. First and foremost, make sure it's going to be a calm night. You don't want the boats to be bouncing side by side. It's bad enough when you're on a mooring and somebody who kicks up a wake, or if it's just a windy area and it's open to the ocean and you're getting waves bouncing and you're by yourself on the mooring. Two boats side by side, it's damn uncomfortable and can damage boats. So make sure it's going to be a calm, peaceful night. Typically the heaviest boat with the biggest anchor will go in the middle and put his anchor down. Make sure the guy knows what he's doing, make sure he knows how to set the anchor, make sure it's done well. My suggestion is then everybody on this boat gets out some fenders, people on this boat get out some fenders, people on this boat get out some fenders. One boat at a time. My suggestion is all hands on deck here. Let's decide this boat's coming next. All hands on deck here. A line ready to go on this boat. A line's ready to go on this boat. And my suggestion is that the person in boat number 2, and I did this with you and rafting up with you, was Jim. I came up alongside Jim in Martha's Vineyard, rafted up with him. And I knew what his boat was going to do. He's at anchor, and his boat was doing this, slowly, at anchor, in the breeze. He was doing this. Now if you try to come up alongside and you try to hit a moving target, that might not be pretty. And it's very hard to do and get it to work right. So what I did was I sat back and I just watched, and I figured out how far Jim went each time. Didn't take much, a couple of passes. I said, okay, he stops there. And what I did was I brought my boat up as he swung back this way. I motored up slowly and I put my boat in this position and I tried to hold the position. And then what I let him do was just swing back toward me. We've got our fenders out, and right about, if I aimed it right about where his boat's gonna stop anyway, that's where I was. Boats aren't, at that point, very little momentum. We have the time, there's that pause where the boat swings, and now it's about to go back the other way, and you've got 15 seconds before, okay, now I'm going back this way again. Well, that 15 seconds was enough to pass lines, adjust the fenders and so forth, and make sure everything was lined up properly. So that's always my suggestion. Come up alongside and wait for this boat that's at anchor to swing back toward you and be right where it comes to a stop before it goes back like this. And then this guy should do the same thing. Presumably 2 boats together aren't going to move as much.
I was gonna say,
It may not be as big a
when
problem.
you tied up to him, it stabilized his boat, made it easier for the other
Maybe.
one to come up.
There were only 2 of us. It was just the 2 of us for the night. So I presume so. But if you're going to do that, have some confidence that the guy who put the anchor down knows what he's doing, that his boat is big enough, that his line is big enough. And if the wind starts to pick up or the waves start to pick up, time to break up this party. Go anchor yourself. Don't be 2 boats at night. Yeah, that's no fun. And at 2 a.m. in the
That's
morning.
actually what happened to us at the next anchorage. We rafted, and this action was happening. We just broke it off and did independent
Quissa,
moorings.
did we?
Yeah.
I forgot that part,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, we were gonna
It
try
was
that.
too much, and we were gonna
And it doesn't take much wave action. You look at it and say, yeah, it's nice and calm. You put two boats together and all of a sudden, if there's any wave action.
The problem that we had is that we were right next to a channel, and people were coming by us,
Not fast,
leaving wakes.
but it didn't
But
have to be much.
It was enough to,
Well, that's the thing, is that it's
Roll it.
amazing how little will make the boats bounce around.
right,
Okay. And if there were, you guys don't have sailboats, but if there were two sailboats, then we have to worry about the yard arms, the spreaders. So we have to move boats forward and aft so they don't hit each other and so forth. For our sailboats, it's even more fun. So rafting is good, but only under limited conditions. Breaking them up, the same thing. The last guy in is the first guy to go, and then finally the guy pulls his thing and departs. I really don't recommend this.
I would never do that.
Rafting etiquette. Okay. Rafting etiquette was just what I talked about. How to come up alongside, how to depart. Last one on is the first one to go in the morning. And also rafting etiquette. Make sure you know the folks real well. Pay attention to excessive noise and excessive conversations. If the folks you're rafting up with decide to head to bed at 9 o'clock at night, maybe sitting in the cockpit drinking and telling funny stories till midnight may not enhance the friendship, so be aware of that stuff. And we just talked about departing. Okay. You folks should have make some notes here. You folks should have
We'll
the
be giving this out.
answers.
We'll be giving this out to everybody. The answers are on the PowerPoint.
And make a notes of one thing for me.
Alright.
Reading the notes that was sent to me. Question number 22, whatever it is, the notes that I was sent as an addendum tell me that is not covered in the text, so you may have trouble answering question 22. And apparently question 24 has something to do with how big should the anchor be, and they came up with an answer that was just the length of the boat. And of course that isn't entirely true. Picking an anchor has a lot more to do with just the length of the boat, weight of the boat, and where you're going to anchor and so forth. So it was not quite the right answer. But. All right, now there's just tons of questions. I'm not going to go through it, especially if Jim says you're going to have all this stuff. Anything that I didn't answer for you guys?
I think we covered it all.
My suggestion is, once you guys get the windlass straightened out, as I suggested with everything, docking or anything else the first time, go out and practice. Go out and find a place off one of the islands in the harbor on a fairly calm day and practice anchoring and practice the techniques and so forth. And but if you've got a windlass and a decent anchor, and I'm sure you do on that thing, just check everything because it came with the boat. Make sure you check all the fittings and the shackles, and if you have any questions about them, just replace them.
Yep.
Just replace them. So.
What you see on TV or the shows, I don't know, but some of them on the boat, they say throw the anchor over the side, it's not tied,
First of all, you don't throw the anchor.
You don't throw the
No,
anchor.
no, but I mean,
But
it was
yes.
on TV,
Yep, you'll see, once you learn how to do it, you'll see a lot of people doing it wrong and not knowing what they're doing and doing it badly. And it's amazing, one of the members took my ABC course years ago, and he bought himself, he's an experienced sailor, but he stepped up big, and he went to a 36-foot sailboat, went into Cutty Hunk, and the moorings were all filled, and he went outside the harbor where there's an anchorage, and he anchored, and along came some big honking boats and anchored on each side of them. And sure enough, late at night, he's suddenly saying to himself, am I dragging? And then he realized these two big honking boats worth 5 times what his were. The knuckleheads didn't know what they were doing, and these two guys were dragging on each side of him. And he says, I stayed put. I did what Joe told me. I
Right.
stayed put.
Mm.
And so.
thank you, and
And And Tori, could you do me a favor and fill this out and just have that next time, just give it to me next Monday? Yeah, the only one that hasn't filled that out.
So I will be here next Monday.
It doesn't matter, even if
No,
it's
no,
even if it's the
no,
Monday afterwards, it's fine.
Yeah, no, but I travel from the 5th to the